Hi everyone, it's Nicole Spohr here today for Simon Says Stamp with a watercolor leaves background. This is definitely a departure from kind of what I normally do, and I totally love that. I have been experimenting with some watercolor products lately, just kind of trying to expand my coloring horizons a little bit outside of my normal comfort zone. Um, Still kind of maintaining what is comfortable for me. And I absolutely adore this large 6x8 stamp set from Simon called Be Kind. And it's got 4 different large leaf images and then one kind of smaller one that could be used to fill in. I'm not using one of the large ones and that little teeny tiny one. And then it's got some beautiful sentiments. However, I'm actually going to use a sentiment from another Simon Says Stamp set for my greeting. But we are going to start by stamping these 3 large images on some Canson watercolor cardstock. I'm using the smoother side of the cardstock rather than the side that has a little more texture to it. They both have some texture, it's watercolor cardstock, but this side has a little less, which I find for stamping and embossing gives me a little bit better result. Also, I'm sticking with something that I am comfortable with, and that's watercoloring within an embossed line. So using some things that I'm not as proficient with something that I do like is one of my little tips and tricks when you're venturing outside of your comfort zone. So if you love the look of embossing, and you love the look of watercolor, but you're just a little unsure, this is a great starting point because it kind of helps hold the color within that stamped and embossed line. It's almost like a little well, which helps that watercolor not migrate outside. Now I am using a water brush pen, but I'm not actually using water in my water brush pen with the Hero Arts Liquid Watercolors. Now the Hero Arts Liquid Watercolors come in a lot of beautiful colors. I am obviously going to stick with my greens and browns for kind of traditional leaf colors, but I am using 4 colors and I am simply mixing and matching those to color in all 3 branches. So they're all going to have a different color combination within these 4 colors. So this first one is the Hero Arts Liquid Watercolor in Pine and Art Print Brown. I also do want to mention really quick, as I was talking about embossing, I used Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink and the antique gold embossing powder for my outline. I did not want my outline to be white. I wanted it to have some kind of color to it, and I love antique gold. So that's the color that I used to emboss my branches. Then I am laying down the pine color, and I'm dipping my paintbrush in to some water, and then I found I got the best results by kind of adding a little water to the leaf and then adding the color, but I didn't always do it that way. But I'm adding pine first and then some art print brown to the leaf, and I can go back over it if I need to, add a little bit more water or whatever it might be. But this really gives kind of, it's definitely a pine color. And the art print brown gives a little bit more texture and interest to the leaves. Definitely not going for perfection, just going for adding color to these, and I ended up being super happy with the results. Like so excited that I really want to try more watercoloring types of images, especially with the Hero Arts Liquid Watercolors, which I have used before, but not always for actually watercoloring. And you're going to see that here in a little bit because I'm going to use these to create my background as well. So that is the first branch, Pine and Art Print Brown. For the next leafy branch, I am going to go with my other 2 colors. That's going to be the Moss Green and Cocoa. And these are the liquid watercolors in those 2 colors. So you can see that's completely a different green color, definitely a mossy green. At first I thought I might pull in some yellow. Really glad I didn't. I'm glad I kind of just stuck with my greens and browns. So this one is going to have a little bit more of that mossy feel to it instead of the more pine feel. and really liking this as well. I found my best results again, one leaf or two leaves at a time. So I'd add in the moss color, then I'd add in a little bit of the cocoa color. And if I needed to go back and add more moss or more cocoa, whatever it was, or even more water, I could do that. I did try to limit how much water I used, and that's mostly because I find I don't have very good control with too much water. So I really would kind of clean off the tip of my water brush pen often, but really loving this. And again, completely different color combination, but still goes together. I'm really excited about this. I don't know if you can tell, but I was really loving how my branches were turning out. I wasn't sure. I wanted really bad to go with the old reliable Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers, but to be really honest, I didn't think I had the colors that I wanted for this project. I really wanted to go with those more natural, deeper, darker green shades and not quite so bright and a little more muted, I guess. And these Hero Arts Liquid Watercolors definitely give me that, and really, really happy with the results. But definitely, if zigs are what you have, you can achieve similar results with those. Other watercolor products, other markers, definitely whatever you have, try them out and see what you can create. But these leaves are big. They are gorgeous. I love them. I can't wait to try some other things with these as well. Beautiful, beautiful stamp set. So for my last branch, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do a different color combination. So this time we are going to combine pine and moss. So I'm kind of laying down the moss, the lighter green color first, and then blending in some of the pine. It almost has a little bit of a more, I hate to say bluish tint, but yes. So there's no brown on these. You could definitely add in brown if you wanted to, but I'm doing more of that shading and things with the pine color, and I love it. So this one's very, very green heavy and gives a completely different look again. So these, I hope, are 3 different ideas on how to use just 4 colors to give you 3 different color combinations and really extend the life of products you might have. Once I have my these branches all watercolored, I did this twice. So I left my stamps in the Misty. I stamped them twice. I colored them both exactly the same. That's going to give me 6 branches for my card. And I did use all of them, and I did use almost every piece. There's going to be a little bit trimmed off, and you're going to see that because one of my favorite go-to techniques is creating an all-over pattern background with stamps or die cuts, or in this case, stamped images that have been die cut. And we're just going to create an all-over beautiful watercolor leaves background. But you want to make sure these are completely dry before you die cut them. I did let mine air dry. If you are in a hurry, hit them with the heat tool and speed that up. But I did create 2 panels exactly the same. Then we're going to take another piece of the Canson watercolor cardstock, and this one I purposely left big. We'll trim it down after we color it, but I'm going to take a dry paintbrush. I'm not dipping this in water. This is going to be a dry paintbrush, and I've got my colors already on my glass work surface. So I've got the pine, I've got the moss. I did have to reactivate and add just a little more color here. And I'm also going to use some Hero Arts Bronze Liquid Watercolor, which I love. It's got a little bit of a shimmer to it. So this isn't going to be the artprint brown or cocoa that I used for the leaves. This one will have a little bit more of that metallic shimmery feel to it. But we are going to just start painting. And I'm using a wider paintbrush. Again, it's dry. I've not dipped it in water. And I'm going to start blending my green colors throughout this panel. Purposely left it big. I can trim it down once these colors have dried, but I'm alternating mostly between moss and pine, which you can see, definitely see the difference here, which I think is really awesome. and not going to worry too much about being exact. I mostly just want a watercolor background, a very simple watercolor background. And I'm going to go back and forth with these colors and kind of fill in all the space. Then we are going to take the bronze and add that in. And there were a few places it got too heavy, and I'm going to kind of clean it off or grab in some green and just blend. We are adding in that shimmery blend, and it is stunning. Once this is colored, this is one of my favorite things to do with the Hero Arts Liquid Watercolors, and especially those metallic-y ones. They blend in with the others beautifully, and they really add a gorgeous depth and dimension to a watercolor background. So very quick, very simple. If you want a background that perfectly matches your project, I highly recommend trying this out and seeing what kind of results you get. So I'm going to set that aside to air dry as well. You can hit it with a heat tool if you need to speed that up. To keep my card consistent, I'm using another scrap of Canson watercolor cardstock, and I am going to stamp the Miss You greeting from the Miss You Missy stamp set on this watercolor cardstock. And I'm stamping that with clear embossing ink and going to heat emboss again with the antique gold embossing powder. So this is what we used for the leaves or those branches. And then we're going to heat set this. So a super simple sentiment that's going to be right in the center of our background. I really contemplated using a whole bunch of different sentiments from this Miss You Missy stamp set. It is another 6x8 stamp set. It's a big one. It has lots of sentiments, lots of coordinating dies, really, really phenomenal stamp set again. Just using a piece of that here. And there is that coordinating rectangular die for this, and you can see all the dies that coordinate with the other sentiments from this stamp set. I'm using some wire snips to trim those apart so that I can line up the die and run this through my Spellbinders Platinum die cutting machine. Because this watercolor paper is not a stark white, I know I touched on this a second ago, that's why I chose to do my sentiment on the same cardstock that I'm using, or the same watercolor paper I'm using for the rest of the design, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't have something that's stark white with this paper here. And I thought it was really important to just make sure that it all matched as well as possible. Now, I know I've been showing this background stamp a lot lately. It's because it's my favorite. We are going to again ink it up with some white pigment ink, and we are going to stamp this text right over our watercolored background. It's dry now, and I love it. Look how awesome that looks. So amazing, and instantly you have created your own pattern paper background. Probably one of my all-time favorite things to do is to create my own pattern paper backgrounds with stamps, dies, inks, all the good things, stencils, whatever it might be. We're going to trim this down now to A2 sized, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And then I'm kind of playing around with what size of die I want to use from the A2 thin frames from Simon Says Stamp, which you guys probably know if you've been following me a while. My favorite, one of my very, very favorite things to do is to create a thin frame in my background. And I used to do it with another set that they had that had just one frame. And they've come out with these frames in several different shapes, and then they also have multiple sizes, which I absolutely love. I think it's just a fantastic finishing touch and one of my all-time favorite things to do for a card. I am now gluing my leaves to my background to finish creating this pattern background with the tone-on-tone, green and bronze background, and then we've got our green leaves. So pretty. They are all hanging off the edge at some place or another. I'm putting some acrylic blocks on top to hold them flat while the glue dries. As the glue is drying or gets dry, I will take my background, flip it over, and trim away any excess with my scissors. being really careful to maintain any of the bigger pieces because we can reuse those to fill in any open areas. Also making sure that if I missed anywhere with glue, I'm going to add additional glue there to make sure everything, all those little leaves and stuff are secure to the background. This is going to be really important because I am going to die cut the whole thing with that thin frame. So I'm filling in then with a couple of the bigger leaf pieces. Again, we're going to set some blocks on top to hold that flat to dry. Trim away the rest of our excess. We're going to discard anything there that we're not using. And then I was going to use this bigger one. I think it's the second largest, but I'm actually going to use the third largest, which is probably my most often used. I'm going to tape that in place. I did let the glue dry all the way, so keep that in mind. The glue is dry, but because we're die cutting through 2 layers of watercolor cardstock, there are a few spots that it just didn't die cut all the way through. So I'm flipping it over and taking a craft knife and very, very gently and slowly making sure that I can trim away this thin frame. We're going to replace it with another white watercolor die cut frame, so it really highlights the sentiment or highlights the center of the card. I have now replaced in the card, I've done the outer frame, we've put in the thin little frame here from watercolor cardstock, and then we're going to replace with the center panel, and it just breaks it up a little bit and draws your eye in. I can't say enough great things. I love those little thin frames. I did back my Miss You sentiment with foam adhesive squares, and we're going to center that in the card. And now we are simply ready for finishing touches. That's going to be Nouveau Crystal Drops in 2 colors. I'm using both pale gold and bright gold. And we're going to scatter these throughout the card design. I kept them really minimal, the embellishments. I really wanted the focus to be the watercoloring that I did for my leaves, but I wanted a little embellishment. So we're going to start with this, and again, just scattering them throughout, going slow. Please, if you're using Nouveau Crystal Drops, be sure that on a scrap piece of paper, you test it out before you take it to your project, just in case there is air in the nozzle. You don't want it to kind of explode all over your project. I had that happen once here a couple years ago, and I was devastated because there was really no way to fix it. I had to completely start over. And where this is the last part of the project, it's so disappointing if you get there and it just explodes. So, and also don't push too hard, because that, if you just squeeze and squeeze, it will pop the top off, and again, it will get everywhere. I've had that happen as well. So there is the Nouveau Crystal Drops. I wanted to add a heart, but I didn't have a gold heart in anything. So I've got these heart embellishments that I got in the February 2020 Simon Says Stamp card kit, but they're pink, white, and red. So what I'm going to do is actually push the white heart into my embossing ink, dip it in the antique gold embossing powder, and heat set it. And it is going to make a little gold heart. So if you want to customize embellishment you already have, this is a great way to do that. And I'm simply going to heat that up. Make sure you let it cool before you touch it, or you'll get a fingerprint in it. I did get my fingerprint in it. So what I did was I just reheated it. I didn't have to add additional embossing powder or anything. I'm just going to reheat it real quick. That's going to remelt it. I'm going to let it cool a little bit more, add a little dab of glue to the bottom of my sentiment block, and then we are just going to pop that in place to finish off our card. I hope you guys have enjoyed this card featuring watercolor leaves background, watercoloring a background, and just some simple embellishment tips and some other design tricks. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more cards featuring Simon Says stamps, dies, and other products that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you never miss a new card making or paper crafting video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I am so glad you're here and I appreciate you all so much. Thanks for stopping by and we'll catch you next time.